Action agenda in COPs, usually it's one of the two major pillars that host countries are undertaking. As you know, the most important actually part of the COP process is this negotiation process. And this is what COPs are for. Conference of the parties of the three agreements, UNFCCC, Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. And mostly Paris Agreement actually. So parties are parties to the Paris Agreement. And as Paris Agreement is being implemented, many difficulties emerge, as is expected, right? Because treaties are by their very nature very vague, right? There is this deliberate ambiguity in treaties. And COPs, Conference of Parties, are the highest decision-making bodies of those treaties, attended by signatories of those treaties. All three happen simultaneously, right? UNFCCC, Kyoto, and Paris. And they try to figure out how to solve those issues of implementation and interpretation at the same time. But this process is very, very difficult because every decision at COP requires total consensus of all the parties. Right? So we are talking about 198 parties, for instance, of UNFCCC, 195 parties to Paris Agreement. They are difficult because the decisions are binding on the parties, so therefore consensus becomes very important. Because of that, a couple of years ago, this idea emerged that let's also have the second pillar, second track of COP process, which could be initiated totally by the host country. Because in negotiation track, it's not up to Azerbaijan to initiate anything, right? UNFCCC Secretariat, which is the custodian of these three treaties, it tells the host country which issues are there that needs to be discussed and decisions needs to be made about, right? And therefore, vis-a-vis that track, the countries came up with the idea of action agenda, which is the bulk of your question, the gist of your question. Action agenda is really very different from negotiated outcomes, right? Because action agenda, as I said, it's totally up to the country to come up with. So Azerbaijan this year really, we don't have to ask anybody and come up with those initiatives. And that way it's different from negotiated track. And second, you don't need consensus here, right? So you don't need all those 198 parties signing up to these initiatives for them to move forward. And also the idea behind action agenda is that negotiations being negotiations, we need to move forward regarding climate crisis and solution of the climate crisis. So any step forward is a plus. So maybe not all countries will support it, maybe not, but maybe 10 countries, 30 corporations, I don't know, 10 NGOs, whatever, but if there is anything that we could do to move forward regarding solution of the climate crisis we are facing, that would be great. So this is the basic framework for action agenda. We have 15 action agenda items because the peace initiatives have kind of two legs. Not surprisingly, probably the most important or one of the most important items in the action agenda is related to finance. Because action agenda items also has to be in line with negotiation track so that there is a certain synergy between them, right? While pushing for one, you can also advance the other. Because time is short, resources are always scarce, and you want to utilize them very efficiently. So finance will be very important. And our Climate Finance Action Fund will be a significant portion of that. And I think the international media probably responds more to that initiative than almost anything else. There are also 4/5 energy-related action agenda items. The initiative that I am seeing a lot of support for is this increasing sixfold the amount of the storage in grid systems. Because, and this is very understandable, so it's part of, we call it a green storage pledge. Why this is so important? Because in terms of green transition, power sector really is regarded as a low-hanging fruit. it's easier to decarbonize the power sector, electricity generation sector than many other sectors, like steel production, for instance. And in power sector, in COP28 last year, a very important decision was made. It was also part of the action agenda of the previous COP country, United Arab Emirates. That was about doubling energy efficiency and tripling renewable energy. Azerbaijan also signed up to that initiative. But to double efficiency and triple renewable energy, current grid systems in the world are not able to absorb all that new technology, right? So you need to build more resilient grids. And for those grids, grid scale storage, batteries, are becoming very, very important. And so this six-fold increase initiative of battery storage from the current status, what it has been in 2022, to 1,500 gigawatts will be very important part of our initiatives. And I really also see a lot of response and interest in the international media and from our parties and non-party stakeholders to this initiative. But that initiative is not just about grid-scale storage. It's also about refurbishing and building new grid capacity till 2040 up to about 80 million kilometers, right, which is equal to the current grid length in the world. We also have very significant, I believe, initiative related to green hydrogen or clean hydrogen. Why this is important? Because as you are realizing green transitioning, there are two major solutions. One solution is green electrons, right? The electricity that you get from renewable sources. But green electrons are not able to solve all the problems when it comes to energy sector. So there are certain industries that we won't be able to decarbonize with green electricity. Steel industry, cement industry, petrochemicals are just some examples. We call them hard to abate sectors, right? Because the current technology doesn't enable us again to decarbonize these areas. So we have to burn something. We have to have this combustion processes. But in combustion, you burn either fossil fuels, which are related to global warming. An alternative to that is to use green hydrogen or clean hydrogen and its derivatives, right? Like green methanol or green ammonia. And also, I think some of the hard to abate sectors is aviation sector or maritime sector or trucks, right? Big cars. Battery storage is not good enough as a technology to solve those problems we are facing there. So therefore, green molecules are as important as green electrons. So our kind of clean hydrogen initiative is there to tackle that aspect of the problem. So I think it's going to be very important in that sense. There are also very important initiatives related to water and agriculture. Water is very important. Why? Because water is the venue, is the means through which most of the world population feels yes, and the negative effects of climate change, right? If you ask anybody, I mean, in fact, if you go to the street and ask people on how they feel that there is something wrong with climate, probably most of them will respond about heat waves. Some of them will talk about forest fires, but these are kind of seasonal things. But the thing that happens throughout a year is water, right? In oceans, we see ocean level rise or ocean acidification in the world because temperatures are rising. Because oceans have this very weird capability of absorbing more heat than land. So most of the heat that we are generating currently, that is, of course, because of greenhouse effect, is being absorbed by oceans, right? So that means that the coastal areas all over the world are suffering, right? Low-lying areas in the world. And also polar areas, mountainous areas, which is also somehow related to water because they have glaciers, or are being affected by, again, this climate change related to water. In our region, in Caucasus, we see the decline in the level of the Caspian Sea, right? Droughts, floods. We call them slow onset events, right, or rapid weather events, typhoons all over the world. So these are the things that are being felt. So therefore, water became a very important part of our initiative. And to be honest with you, whenever we meet our partners, state or non-state stakeholders of climate change issue, water is something they really love to talk about, because again, there is probably no community that is not suffering because of water-related issues. Agriculture, I think I'm not going to be mentioning all of them, but I'm kind of picking the ones that kind of randomly, all of them are important. All 14 initiatives are important, but agriculture, I would also specifically emphasize the importance of agriculture. It's related to water. Because of issues related to water, we have agricultural issues. But even beyond water, because of desertification, land degradation related to climate change, agricultural processes are suffering. And when agriculture suffers, you have food problem. And food is almost as important as water. But at the same time, agriculture is the second most significant area beyond energy and besides energy that produces greenhouse gases, right? Around 19%, 20%, let's say, around 20% of all greenhouse gases are coming from agricultural sector, right? About 70% come from energy sector and 20% from agricultural sector. So agriculture becomes an area that contributes to greenhouse gases, but at the same time, it's an area where we need a lot of, or where we observe a lot of vulnerabilities, and we need to protect a lot of communities all over the world. And also, probably lastly, I would like to mention our initiative on digitalization, because increasing reliance on artificial intelligence is increasing the power demand all over the world, right? So information technologies are making our lives easier. They are also bringing solutions to climate crisis. But especially with this artificial intelligence boom, we see that the demand for energy is increasing. So Googling something versus asking the same question to AI, ChatGPT, for instance, there's a 10 times difference in terms of energy use, right? And if we continue this path, then we need to make sure that the energy used by information technologies and artificial intelligence included are coming from green sources. So this is also very significant, but also I should indicate that our initiatives pay as much attention to just transition, to indigenous communities, to vulnerable communities, to gender issues, to women, to children, to youth, because unless we really move forward in an inclusive manner, our solutions won't be inclusive either. And we don't want to create this global divide as we try to solve global climate issue. Certain parts of the world shouldn't be benefiting more from climate solutions than others. Certain segments of society shouldn't be benefiting more than the others. So the most vulnerable should be getting at least as much attention and as much help as the more powerful. So I think this kind of would be my overall assessment of our action agenda items. First, I would like to start with zones, because this is really something that matters to Azerbaijan. And usually when you come up with initiatives, you want to make sure that they have traction at all 4 levels: subnational level, national level, regional level, and global level, right? Unless your initiative is meaningful at all these levels, the chance of success won't be high, okay? So our green zones are coming from Karabakh and East Zengezur, because they were totally destroyed by the occupiers. Azerbaijan, as always, turned this disadvantage into advantage, build it according to the latest technologies, right? Because already established urban environments are very difficult to retrofit, very, very difficult, right? There will be a lot of voices opposing to that. But when you have total destruction, it's a clean slate, Right? You can start anew, you don't have to ask or incorporate many interests, and therefore you can apply the latest technology. This was the idea behind green energy zones in Karabakh and East Zengezur. And actually it was Ministry of Energy that hired TEPSCO, Japanese consulting company. And they came up with the idea on how to turn this area into green energy zone. And green energy zone basically means that, it means a lot of things. But basically you are turning this area, a smaller portion of your country, into one of the best examples of net zero. And in fact, Karabakh and East Zengezur regions are the first regions in Azerbaijan that committed to net zero by 2050. And Nakhchivan is also in line to become a green energy zone. So we said that this is sub-national kind of area. It is very important for Azerbaijan at the national level. But also, I think there are already calls at the regional level to imitate this. And we thought that Azerbaijan can lead by example and tell everybody that, hey, we have this idea and we are developing it already. And why don't you join us in doing that? Because we are told that in the world, there are green villages, there are green cities, but green zones of the size that we have in Karabakh, probably in the world, you don't have that kind of initiative. And also, although it's just two regions of Azerbaijan, in a combined manner, that area is close to the area of Lebanon, right? It's a very big chunk of the territory, right? And also, I should indicate that in the world, many countries are scared to commit their entire country to net zero. And if so, why don't you start with a smaller portion of your territory, committed to net zero, test your ideas, understand your vulnerabilities, learn by doing, and eventually expand that idea to your entire country. So this is the idea really behind Green Zone. And we believe that, again, it will get a lot of support because that's a very great idea that has been led basically by Azerbaijan. Green energy corridors also comes from the idea that we have been very good in terms of building energy corridors, right? We started maybe with oil corridor and natural gas corridor. And the third natural consequence or stage rather would be green corridors, right? Still energy corridor, but this time it will be green one. And of course, the Caspian Sea, which has been very generous to us in terms of oil and gas, is also very generous regarding offshore wind energy. And this green energy corridor, we call it Caspian Black Sea Europe Green Energy Corridor, is about really transferring and selling and exporting Caspian Sea's vast offshore energy all the way to European continent, right? And we believe that in the world, there are many places where supply and demand could be met by these kinds of corridors. And so this is an idea that is taking off in different parts of the world. And we believe that it's very timely because in certain parts of the world, you have a lot of demand for energy, but they may not have good sources of renewable energy. But if you connect those transcontinental or transnational corridors with the help of these corridors, those different parts, then you are creating a lot of efficiencies. Another thing about green energy corridors is that they increase the resilience of grids, right? The power grids that the countries have. So in that sense, that is something that is barely happening in the world, and Azerbaijan has been on the leading segment, leading portion of that process, leading stage of that process. And we also wanted to export kind of this idea as well. So green corridors and green zones is something we are doing, is something that we are among pioneers in the world. In terms of the idea and implementation. And then we are inviting others to join because, as you said, it's not just going to bring a lot of benefit to Azerbaijan, to local communities and to our region, but also could have global consequences. And therefore, we are inviting others to join this initiative. Transparency platform is about this, right? So what is happening in the world and what is happening, especially in the negotiation process, is that, as you know, the most important issue right now is climate finance. And climate finance is, the gist of it is about how developed countries that has produced the bulk of greenhouse gases and that mainly gave rise to this global warming should be helping developing countries. Because developing countries are not mainly responsible for the greenhouse gases, the bulk of the budget of the greenhouse gases. To give you an example, African continent contributes less than 4% to greenhouse gases in the world. But the 17 of the 20 most climate vulnerable countries are in Africa. Small island countries, they contribute less than 1% to global warming. But some of those countries are going to be submerged under the ocean, right? And the process already started. So there is this kind of discrepancy, and therefore the Paris Agreement has this very celebrated phrase, common but differentiated responsibilities. We have common responsibilities but differentiated between especially developing and developed world. And we have different capabilities and different national circumstances. So finance becomes really what enables climate action to be collective. Otherwise, this collectivity breaks down. But when developing countries are asking developed countries to contribute their share, so-called means of implementation, so that they can also move forward with their climate action, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation, usually developed part of the world is asking for a certain plan, climate action plan. And these climate action plans are reflected in mainly two documents. One of them is NDC/LTS, and the other is NAP, right? One of them is about mitigation, the other is about adaptation. And when developed countries claim that they already have been helping developing countries in terms of finance, technology, and capacity building, which are those three means of implementation to help developing countries, developing countries are asking for a documentation to prove that they really have been helping. They have really been helping developing countries. So what becomes important is that transparency of information becomes a very crucial issue to make sure that developed and developing countries are moving forward, right? Both in terms of climate action and climate finance. So the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement is just about that. We have MRV system in UNFCCC system, which was about making sure that actions taken and support provided is reflected in documents. And now it's being replaced by enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. And one of the most important tools of enhanced transparency framework is BTR, right? Biannual transparency reports. And for the first time this year, the countries are supposed to be submitting their BTRs by December. Azerbaijan is leading by example, and hopefully our BTR will be ready by the start of COP. And BTRs are exactly those documents that create transparency between developed and developing countries and between the parties to the Paris Agreement and UNFCCC. Because when there's transparency, when you know what a certain party is really doing in terms of climate action and means of implementation, that clarity and transparency and sincerity in terms of action creates, first, it enables us to calculate what's going on, to understand, to stocktake. But at the same time, it creates a very legitimate ground for support mechanisms, including finance. So therefore, and because again, this COP is about finance, we said that this kind of financial help could only be possible with very ambitious documents that are being expressed in a very transparent manner. Transparency becomes key to global and collective climate action. Therefore, by its very nature, I think transparency became the core of our initiatives. And again, we are doing that already. We established and organized a lot of BTR workshops to help different countries to come up with their BTRs. But we said that we shouldn't be confining these processes to this year alone, right? We should make sure that there's a legacy, it continues forward, because without transparency, this mechanism, this collective climate action mechanism enshrined in UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement will not work. So we want to institutionalize this mechanism so that many years from now, As the nations move forward, they will always be asking for these transparent reporting systems. And I think our platform is just serving that. It helps us to, again, galvanize support for the current, this year's activities that we are leading, and at the same time creates a legacy beyond COP29 for years to come. I think the main problem emanates from the discrepancy between what is legal and what is real. UNFCCC was opened for signatures in 1992. In 1992, we had a very different world than we have now, right? Because certain countries today that are quite well developed, by UNFCCC standards, they are referred to as developing countries, right? And this developing and developed divide is very important because it creates certain legal responsibilities on countries, especially regarding finance. So because of this differential growth rates between 1992 and 2024, what those documents tell us should be the case and what reality tells us should be the case, they don't always overlap. And this creates some kind of a tension between the countries of global south and global north. Our take is that we should be really true to the legal documents because that's the framework within which we are acting. And we shouldn't be diluting the legal responsibilities with the claims to the contrary, because that way you can start to create some kind of global constitutional crisis, right? Because if you go beyond the framework of Paris Agreement or UNFCCC, then some countries might say that, you know what, if that's the case, then let's come up with a new treaty, which we cannot afford right now. It's about, the time is for action, not for new treaty. But at the same time, there are certain realities on the ground that should be addressed, right? Certain countries, different from 1992 situation, are more capable today. And some other countries are calling on them to contribute more, especially to for the countries that are not developed, least developed countries, African continent countries, small island developing countries, for instance. But again, for us, this shouldn't be a barrier stopping climate action, but we need to come up with creative solutions to overcome this barrier. And I think the solution we have is that, again, what is legal and what is real, both of them are important, but they shouldn't be mixed up. We shouldn't be diluting the responsibilities that are enshrined in those documents. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that the countries that are more capable of doing certain things, supporting the entire global system, if you like, for climate action shouldn't be doing more. But keeping them at least conceptually different and apart from each other. But understanding the importance of both in terms of climate action could be the solution. But at the end of the day, I should tell you that Azerbaijan is not there to solve the problems of the global climate crisis, right? We are the host of the negotiations, and negotiations by the very agreements that give rise to them tell us that it should be party-driven. So it's the parties to the Paris Agreement, it's the parties to the UNFCCC that should come together and solve the problem. It's up to them, those 198, 195 parties. What Azerbaijan should be doing is to create a fertile and creative and transparent environment, an inclusive environment for these discussions to happen. So this is our responsibility, but we are also calling on the parties to move forward and bridge their own differences. And in that process, we are ready to employ every legal and legitimate means, but the parties should understand their responsibilities too. COP truce, again, it has two elements. This peace and climate nexus has two elements. I think one of them is very creative, this COP truce idea. It was inspired by Olympic truce. Climate change is killing more and more people. We don't sometimes feel it because they are slow killers, right? But wars, I mean, this is the ugliest institution out there that is killing human beings here and now, right? So the idea is that climate is important, but when it comes to human lives, climate becomes a secondary issue. So why don't we use climate context to call on everybody to stop fighting at each other, ceasefire. Because we believe that even 1 hour of a ceasefire, if caused by climate sensitivity, if it saves just one life, I think that it's worth it, right? But at the same time, we also indicate that wars are huge emitters of greenhouse gases. You use a lot of technology, you use traditional methods, and all those technologies you use, all those bombs exploding. And again, I'm not trying to take or ascribe any kind of secondary value to human life, but at the same time, it's a very, very serious emitter of greenhouse gases. And therefore, we believe that there is a lot to be exploited there in a good sense of the word. COP truce is something, as an idea, we are going to put it forward. Again, it's up to the, hopefully, and we are going to do our best, but as an idea, as I said, even 1 hour would make us very happy. But at the same time, as you imply in your question, I think climate and peace nexus has a lot to be explored and exploited, and this is why we opened up the second leg of the initiative to see how this nexus could be exploited fully, whereby the gains will be both peace and climate solutions. COP29 really, many people said that it's already a success because COP29 also happened because Azerbaijan and Armenia moved forward in their peace negotiation, right? We supported each other in the process, and as a result of that process, these things are happening today, and we are going to be hosting this event. So we are really hopeful that COP29, as it started with a step towards peace, will continue that process, and hopefully by COP or during COP, we are going to be adding to what happened before, and the foundational basis of the sustainable peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia will be strengthened, and hopefully final solution will be reached between these countries. But at the same time, politics is politics. For us, it is one of the consequences, one of the potential positive consequences of this initiative. But again, we look at that issue globally, right? As I said before, what matters is that both subnational, national, regional, and global levels, all of them respond and all of them benefit from every initiative. Yes, in our region, we need that past grievances between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which started after the occupation of Azerbaijan lands, to be over and forever. But at the same time, we are not confining our vision to our region alone. We are looking globally and trying to get the most. Again, to me, when peace and climate are compared, I have a very difficult job, right, in terms of prioritizing one over the other. Because COP is about climate, and our mandate is about solving climate crisis. But when we talk about peace and war, there is nothing that can trump peace and war, right? So it becomes the most important issue. So we are trying not to go beyond our mandate, which is about climate, but at the same time see how we can contribute using this occasion to war, which in turn will contribute also to the solution of climate crisis that we have today.